Today I'm speaking with Anna McBride. Anna, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, Tim, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you're here. And I'm just going to give a quick bio for you, and then we'll get to know you a little bit better. But Anna grew up in a small town in Massachusetts, and she and her husband and daughter now live in the mountains of Western Maine. I'd love to hear about that in a minute. She studied at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, focusing on English and creative writing. That's awesome. She's, of course, an avid reader. She loves to travel and has done a lot of that. And she's also an artist specializing in floral landscapes. She uses a variety of media such as acrylic, oil, and gouache paint. Did I say that word correctly?
Yeah,
Gouache?
gosh, yeah, you got it.
And her website is annamcbrideartwork.com. I'll have that link beneath this video. And
Yes,
Anna, I'm going to start by saying I've seen your art. Your art is amazing. You're a
thank
very
you.
talented artist. But if
Thanks.
you could tell us more about yourself.
Sure. So I live in Western Maine and we live on a little homestead. So we have chickens and we have ducks and we used to have rabbits and we're getting some goats. We have a big greenhouse and a garden and we love it out here. We've been out here for almost 8 years and it's really beautiful out here. Like if you were to turn out of our driveway and just go left, it's all wilderness till you get to Canada. It's
Mm,
gorgeous. And we love it. And yeah, I've been painting on and off for years, but I really got serious about it about 2 years ago. And I hung out with Bob Ross on YouTube for about a year, and he taught me a lot of the technical skills and a lot of the shadowing and stuff. And then I've kind of just taken it in my own right. And I use a lot of bright colors. I like to use gouache and acrylics mostly. But yeah,
mm.
so I really love my art, and yeah, it's a great project for me and a really fun time. Yeah.
That's awesome. I might be a little bit jealous of your homesteading. Actually, I'm very jealous of it. My kids eat so many eggs, so I wonder about that. Like
Yeah.
sometimes, you get like this great sale on eggs. I'm like, oh my gosh, we just got like 3 dozen eggs. This will last us a week, and 2 days later they're gone. I'm like, what?
Yeah, we eat a lot of eggs and it's amazing. Our chickens give us so many eggs that we just give them away to people.
Hmm.
And the ducks have produced a lot of eggs. So yeah, it's nice. And I mean, my husband has really taken the reins on the homestead thing. So I help him where I can, but I'm more of like the poet, reader, artist kind of person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, again, everyone, please do check out her website, this link beneath this video. But we love to invite people, of course, to share their stories. If you could take us back, how did your journey with Christianity begin from the earliest days? And I'll jump in with some questions, but looking forward to getting to know you better.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was not raised Christian like you and I would consider evangelical Christian. My grandpa was old school Italian and he was a devout Catholic. So he kind of passed that on to my dad. And then my dad, I think, wanted me and my sister to participate in it a little bit. So we would go to like the big holiday masses, Easter, Christmas. We did a little bit of Saturday school, some of the vacation Bible school, but it was mostly cultural. It wasn't a huge part of our life. It wasn't, we weren't devout Catholics. It was more social and cultural. So I grew up very average American household. We lived on a cul-de-sac in a small town in Massachusetts. I grew up with the same 80 kids from elementary school to graduating high school. My life was my friends and my sports. So that was my childhood. It
Despite
was
that background, did you feel like there was some sense that you did kind of at least assume God was there, or did you ever think through it as a kid much?
I never thought through it as a kid, really. It wasn't a thought process of mine. I never really questioned if there was a God or not, or had any kind of big crisis of faith or anything growing up. I didn't think about that at all.
Gotcha.
Um,
I got to ask,
yeah,
with the Italian background, you
yeah.
must have had some great, great food in that household.
It's sad. I wish I could say I did, but my grandmother, who was Italian, she passed away when my mom was pregnant with me, and she was the cook. And
Mm,
so I never got to try any of her Italian cooking, and my mom did most of the cooking, and she's not Italian. So I didn't
gotcha.
really get to, yeah, it's kind of sad, but I didn't get to eat much of the authentic Italian food. But
Mm,
Italy's on my bucket list for traveling, so one day I will.
nice, nice.
Yeah. Yeah. But it really wasn't until high school, my senior year of high school, I was in a history class. And I want to talk about like this part of my life because there's a big buildup to my conversion when I was 28 to evangelical Christianity and being on fire for Christ. So in order to really to explain how someone in my position can convert not being raised in it, I kind of need to go a little bit backwards first. So the beginning of it was in high school in a history class. where we were talking about JFK and the whole magic bullet conspiracy theory. And that was the first time I had ever heard of a conspiracy theory or thought about that. And I was super fascinated. And then I was in another elective class in my senior year of high school where we talked politics. We talked about the economy. We talked about conservatism, liberalism, like all these different things. And people would debate each other, and it was just like an open dialogue. And so between those two things, my thinking kind of shifted. I allowed myself to be like, I wonder if like the way the world is maybe doesn't need to be this way, or maybe there are things that are hidden from us, and I need to seek out truth and information. And so that was really the beginning of starting to think differently. And then when I got to college, I had a very average freshman year, partied, hung out with friends, studied, did my thing. And it wasn't until my sophomore year of college that the worldwide protest called Occupy Boston came around. Do you remember that in 2011?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it started as Occupy Wall Street. So New York City, they set up all the tents and it was a big
Yeah.
protest and everything. Okay, so it came to Boston, and it came right across from Shell Station in Dewey Square, right across from the Federal Reserve in this like random piece of grass amongst huge buildings. And they just set up a massive tent city. And I was drawn to that like a moth to a flame. I was just like, this is the coolest thing I have ever seen. I can't leave. So I had a job. I didn't quit my job, but I left my apartment for 3 months. My roommates were like, where'd Anna go? But I was down at Occupy, had my own tent. And it started off as wanting the Federal Reserve to be audited. But then it just turned into having their complaints, too many taxes, the environment is getting bad, whatever, that kind of thing. And there was a media tent, a like a hospital tent, a food tent. I mean, it was a little city in tents, and people from every walk of life came together and were together for this. And that's where I met my husband James. We met in 2011. We've been together for 14 years. We've had our ups and downs, but that's where we met. And Occupy Boston was a huge mind shift for me, like a huge introduced to all sorts of conspiracy theories, introduced to all sorts of alternative lifestyles, alternative living, alternative thinking, just open doors of worlds I never knew existed. And I was enamored by it. I was so fascinated.
Mm.
And Occupy Boston changed the trajectory of my life. When it ended, James and I ended up hitchhiking around the country for 4 years. And we traveled all over the place and we met all sorts of different people. But the massive part of our travels and of my life, up until me sitting here with you, has been searching for truth. What is the truth of our reality? Who's in control? Who's in charge? What is going on here? And James and I have always, always been searching for that truth. And that has led us down many different paths. And when we were hitchhiking out to Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, we went to something called the Rainbow Gathering. And it's a big spiritual hippie festival. And that's where I was introduced to the New Age movement. So I no longer thought that changing the government and changing politics was the truth or the way things should be. Now I moved into, oh, the spiritual aspect of life is the truth. And I need a higher consciousness and I need to be in touch with my higher self. And meditating will help calm me and fulfill me. So I got into all of that: tarot cards, crystals, chakra meditation, that entire world. That became my life, and that played out in my travels. We moved out to Hawaii for a little while and worked on an organic farm out there. And the big island of Hawaii is just filled of the New Age movement. And so we were just immersed in that lifestyle and in that culture. And I thought I had found the truth. I mean, I was a pusher of that onto non-New Age believers, So I was radical in the New Age movement. And I was like, I figured it out. I figured out the truth. We need a higher consciousness and better vibrations, and we can attract our own reality and all this stuff. And I was hyper involved in that.
Did
And
that
then,
feel fairly fulfilling to both of you at the time, in sense of like,
absolutely.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
what was like the best part of the New Age, your time in the New Age movement? Like, what was the part that gave you you'd say the most peace?
I would say believing that I was in control, complete control of my reality, to the point where if I had something that I wanted, all I had to do was visualize myself having it, and it would come into reality. And
Mm.
also, I was heavy into tarot cards. So that brought me a lot of comfort and peace because I believe that I could read what my spirit guides and what my higher self were telling me was happening in my life, what was going to happen, decisions I should make. So I thought I had like a huge counsel in my life, and it was a lot of the practices brought peace because you felt like you were in control of your destiny. I would say would be that.
I've heard the term spirit guide, of course, before, but is for you, was that like I know some people have used the idea of like animal spirit guides. Other
Mm-hmm.
people, it seems like it's more like deceased ancestors. For other people, it's just like spiritual beings, almost like angels or something.
Yeah.
What did that mean to you?
It was all of that, really. It was a collective. You could have a spirit guide animal, you could have it be an angel, or you could have it be some kind of like terrestrial spiritual being that you didn't know personally, but they were there helping you. They were assigned you, and they were there to make sure your life was going the way you wanted it, or to help you stay out of danger or whatever. But you had something there. And
Hmm.
I was really into angels and angel tarot cards and all of that. So I firmly believed in a crazy spiritual realm outside of what our eyes can see.
Hmm. I, of course, never went down that route with New Age, but I did get exposed a little bit to sort of a perspective that says there's angels and demons around us everywhere, kind of fighting. And
Yes.
are you familiar with the author Frank Peretti?
Oh yeah, I read one of his books.
Okay, yeah, there's Present
Yeah.
Darkness and Piercing the Darkness, and
Yes.
he may have written
Yeah.
more, but that kind of got my wheels turning a lot, and
Uh-huh.
I didn't quite know what to think of it all because I always
Mhm.
thought, well, it sounds like they're just fighting and they're kind of like even, like as if you got the two tennis players and they're both like world champions, like
Yeah.
one of them's not going to dominate, they're just going to go back and forth. One's going to win, the other guy's going to win. But I did get the sense like whenever you really fail at something, like you sin, you think about something you shouldn't, or you even something like you can't focus on the pastor because he's preaching, and
Hmm.
you're so distracted by even something as stupid as the shadows on the wall.
Hmm.
It's like that's the demons trying to keep you from focusing on the God of the Bible. And I always wonder about that. But and
Oh yeah.
the weirdest experience I had with the New Age was, are you familiar with Boulder, Colorado at all?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a place there called Pearl Street, which is like
Okay.
pretty much like a New Age headquarters, maybe of the whole world. I don't know, but that was weird. I got to go there once to visit some family, and it was like witchcraft everywhere. And
Yeah.
as a Christian, of course, you're just thinking, holy smokes, like this place is demonic. Like
Uh-huh.
this is bad. Like I don't believe in vibes and juju, but if I did, this place has got it, you know?
Yeah, I would get there for sure. I would totally, like everything you just said, I would believe in. It would kind of morph into, oh, okay, the spiritual realm is real, but I was actually on the enemy side. I wasn't communicating with spirit guides or angels. I was communicating with demons, and Satan was deceiving me. That would be my Christian thinking once I converted.
Okay.
And so I totally, completely understand that. But when I was in the New Age movement, I thought it was like there were spiritual beings. Some were not the greatest, but most were there to help you, and it took all sorts of different forms: ancestors, animals, or spirit guides.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
interesting how that has a lot of parallels to animism. Are you familiar with animism?
Mm-mm.
It's the idea that a lot of tribal people basically live with that worldview. They're not trying to worship this god versus that god. They're
Yeah.
just aware that there's spirits everywhere, and the spirits are
Yeah.
connected to physical things like the trees and the rocks and the stream and the
Sure.
garden. And so if something bad happens, oh, Uncle so and so walked beneath that tree in a storm and it fell and killed him.
Yeah.
That tree has a bad vibe, bad spirit. So you either go stay away from it, or you do this little mantra. If you say these magic words
Oh,
as you walk
sure.
by, the spirit kind of doesn't see you, you're invisible. And it's interesting how there's some parallels there where like there's spirits everywhere. You're not trying to worship all these spirits. You're just trying to say which ones are bad, and hopefully they can ignore you, and
Hmm.
which ones are good, and you kind of stay in touch with them so they can kind of help you on your path. It's interesting. Some parallels there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we used to use sage to cleanse everywhere we went. Like we always had sage bundles on us. We're like, oh, if there's a bad spirit in here, we need to cleanse it away. So yeah, a lot of that stuff mixes and merges, and it's quite mind blowing when I started to deconvert from Christianity. I realized, whoa, a lot of what we do in Christianity is very similar to what I was doing in the New Age movement. We just have different terms. We just
Yep.
call it different things, but they're pretty much the same thing. So that got interesting once I deconverted. But I mean, yeah, I was heavily in the New Age movement for a long time. And
Mm.
we traveled for the first 2 years all over the place. And then this part of my story is huge to my conversion. In 2014, we had a friend from Occupy Boston go down to southern Arizona, and he was about 13 miles from the border of Mexico. And he told us he was doing community work, and we didn't really know what this community work was. We were just looking for another adventure. So we're like, okay, we'll come down to southern Arizona and hang out with you for a while. And we bought a super beat up Oldsmobile car, and the muffler was all busted and the exhaust was just a mess. So we sounded like a dirt bike going all the way from Massachusetts down to southern Arizona. We traveled with two other people, four dogs, no money. We just traded jewelry and tie-dye t-shirts that we made for gas. And people were really cool. We met a lot of people doing that, but we got down there. And so our friend was actually working for a Christian ministry. And so this is the first time I would be introduced to evangelical Christianity. And so these two people, I'm going to call Bob and Sally because I don't want to use their real names. They are a massive, massive part of my story. And something to know about Bob and Sally is they lived the walk to the nth degree. I mean, they are very, very serious. They're not just what we call pew potatoes. Like they sit in the pew on Sunday and then they leave and they go throughout their week and then they come back every Sunday. They lived out what they believed the Acts church was. So it was your entire mission in life is the Great Commission. You're supposed to die to self. You're supposed to not live in the flesh, but live according to the spirit and convert as many people as possible to Christianity. And that's what they've done their entire life. So they're 100% serious. And so we witnessed that going out there. And they had a jail ministry and a thrift store ministry. So the county would call Bob and Sally and say, we have 3 new prisoners coming out of jail. Can you house them? And they would say, yep, we'll take them right away. They rented this huge house out in the desert of Arizona where all the prisoners lived. They worked Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 at the thrift store. And then they had to go to all the weekly Bible studies and church on Sunday. And so we got involved with that and we helped, keep the house clean. We worked at the thrift store. We worked at this old abandoned Bible college, fixing it up. So we were immersed in their lifestyle for 6 months. But we were we were like the dirty weed smoking, alcohol drinking, new age movement hippies in this Christian evangelical world. But the thing with Bob and Sally is they showed us no judgment. They loved us. I mean, they just took us in and we were like children to them. And so my first experience with evangelical Christianity was very, very positive. And I saw people living out what their faith and believing in it with all of their heart. And so that was my first introduction to that.
When you were there, did they present the gospel to you much in terms of like trying to get you saved, or were they easing you into it?
Both. So their approach to how to evangelize and then make disciples is not to shove it down your throat, like repeating the gospel over and over, saying like you need to accept Christ as your Lord. It was more, you're going to watch how we live and the joy that we have, and you're going to be so attracted to it that you're going to want to know what we have. And that's how they live. But when we were at the Bible studies with them and when we went to church, we heard it. I mean, the pastor preached it and we heard them talk about it. And in the thrift store, they always had Ray Comfort playing in the background and his
Oh
videos and
no.
everything. And so I heard it. But I never was convicted of sin back then. I never was like thinking there was any truth to it. I was kind of like, I have my own spirituality, you have yours, and they can both work together. There's truth in some of them because in the New Age movement, you're taught or you believe that Jesus was an ascended master. So he had achieved an enlightened state. He had teachings that made him enlightened, and he's residing in the heavens. But it was never, you need him as a savior, you need to be washed in his blood, you need your sin forgiven. That's not how I ever viewed Jesus back then. And so, yeah, I heard the gospel all the time. Nothing stuck. I didn't feel convicted. And I didn't make any kind of profession of faith. I left them in the same way I came in, a traveling hippie, pretty much.
I love how you're bringing out the idea of how Christians do tend to portray this, which is the idea that you'll know we're Christians by our love, by our
Mhm.
witness. And have you ever heard of the group Newsboys?
Yeah, yeah,
They've got that one song, I think it's called "Shine," but the words go shine, make them wonder what you've got, make them wish that
sure.
they were not on the outside looking in, and so
Hmm.
forth. But this idea that that you're all in darkness and we've got the light, and when you really
Yes.
look at our lives, you're going to see the difference. I
Yes.
certainly that was like my bread and butter back in the day, of course.
Hmm.
When you looked at that, did it offend you the way that they were? I assume saying that people that don't believe their way are on the way to hell.
No, it didn't. And they weren't really heavy on that.
Okay.
They didn't ever really say to us, well, if you don't convert, you're going to end up in hell and then in the lake of fire for all eternity being tortured. We never heard it like that. It was really presented as this is the love of Christ. We live the way we live. They lived in a trailer. They didn't spend money on worldly things. I mean, Bob wore the same black t-shirt up until this day, seeing him just a couple years ago. It's like they didn't live like they lived completely counterculture to I mean honestly to the way most Christians live. I mean they lived out the faith. So we didn't get the fear mongering from them. We got more of this is why we live the way we live. We're here to help people. We want to see people come to Jesus because he can fix all of this.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. And just before you go into the next part,
Yeah.
for you and your husband, you were pretty much on the same page throughout the majority of these stages of the
Always.
journey.
It amazes me to this day. My husband and I have been side by side throughout every phase of our lives, every spiritual thing that we've gone through, from Occupy Boston to the New Age movement to alternative living, like off grid. I'll get into our off grid story, and then to Christianity, and then deconversion.
Mm,
I
that's
am
so cool.
so grateful that we deconverted together, because for the past 3 months, we have just been talking for hours at a time, just bouncing it off each other, going through what we got ourselves involved in, the reality of what we got ourselves involved in, amazed at ourselves that we got involved in this, and then trying to figure out how it happened based on our history. So that's why I think like a huge part of my story, we need to go into the past to come to the present, because it's the buildup, it's the lead up to how someone in my position can convert by not being raised in it.
Yeah, I'll say I'm so glad that you all have been able to take the journey together, because that's worth its weight in gold. It's so precious, and as you know, a lot of people don't survive that. A lot of
Yeah.
relationships do end up go separate paths, and especially if you've got fundamentalism mixed in there, where it's like
Oh yeah.
it's my way or the highway, baby, and like we're not deviating. And it's like if someone
Mhm.
says, "Oh yes, we are," it's like I guess that's it, and it's the whole unequally yoked equation comes in pretty heavily.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, we did find ourselves in fundamentalism, and that's where it got really crazy for me. But so after we left Bob and Sally in Arizona, we left not as Christians, parted ways on great terms. I stayed in contact with Sally throughout all the years that I didn't see her. It was about 8 years until I saw her again. We texted, we emailed. She always checked up on me. And after Arizona, we traveled around a bit, went back out to Hawaii, just went to some random places, and then ended up in California was our last place that we were at during our hitchhiking days and van days. And when we were in California, we came into a little bit of money, and we said, we're tired, we're done. It's been 4 years of this. We want to settle down. But again, we were of the mindset, getting deeper into conspiracy theories, deeper into not wanting to live a traditional lifestyle. So we hopped on to the tiny house off-grid movement, and we bought a piece of land out in Maine and built an off-grid cabin. And because we had no cell phone service out there, we had no internet. I mean, we're hauling water for baths, for drinking water, we're cooking over open campfires as our form of eating. And so as a form of entertainment at night, we would go down to the local little cafe convenience store that had Wi-Fi, and we'd take our laptops and we would get on YouTube and we would download videos to watch by the campfire at night. And so at this point, we had been in the New Age movement for years, and we were kind of getting tired of it, because a lot of it was you need to always be positively thinking, and you need to be attracting your reality, and you need to be figuring all this out. And it just became exhausting. The tarot cards eventually became very confusing for me. It just very naturally fell away. But now I'm like, well, okay, so if that wasn't it, what is it? What's the truth? How do I figure this life out? And when we got on YouTube and started downloading videos, we were getting very deeper and deeper into the deep conspiracy theories and the mysteries of the world. And what we ended up gravitating towards was Christian content creators who would make end time prophecy videos from the book of Revelation, from Daniel, and they would merge it with current events. So they would put scripture on the screen, and then they would show you images of war or images of disease or this thing happening in the economy, or they would start talking about the mark of the beast and how it might be this person or this government entity or this new thing that's coming out. And we were just like, whoa, this seems very truthful. This seems to have a lot of truth to it. And so it was around 2016 to 2018 of 2 years of watching content like that. And that's when I started to believe that the Bible was true, that there was truth in the Bible. But I had no concept of a savior, no concept of sin or repentance or anything like that. It was just becoming, okay, this world's crazy. Satan is most likely running it. Satan's most likely in charge of our government, of the media, of the music industry. He's most likely in charge of like the world elite government. So you're going up to the upper echelons past our government and into the people who control the world and the banking system. And that's how our worldview was. Is Satan's in control. He's got it all under his thumb, and that there was this epic spiritual war happening between good and evil. And we started to believe that the Bible was true.
It's amazing how there's some of the ways that those channels, I've seen a few of them, probably more than I'd like to admit, but they really, they know what sells, I've noticed a lot. It's that, of course, the end time stuff, a lot of the political stuff. They can make a lot of money off of just connecting the dots of the whole Donald Trump stuff, etc. But also near-death experiences, where they're like, I had a vision. I was almost dead on the operating table, but I came back, and in that 5 minutes, God took me to heaven and showed me this or that. And it's amazing. You see some of those, like one video gets 200,000 views, but like they know how to sell, and it really does seem like it's almost. I mean, this is a judgment call, of course, but it seems like some of it's almost more like a business. Like they know it's going to sell, but regardless of whether they're doing it for that reason or because they really believe it, it is amazing how much like those experiences tell us that we're very easy to be duped. It's easy to dupe us. We're all suckers, as they say, suckers born every minute. And you get people in the right niche, and they'll buy it. And it's been shocking to me too. A different but somewhat related note is the flat Earth stuff. And you're just like, how are you all doing this? How do you not see past what they're saying? But some people, it's like the rabbit trail. You go down the rabbit trail deep enough, and it's kind of scary, because you think for you to get back out of a rabbit hole that deep, you're gonna have to unweave a lot of stuff. And it's hard, and I'm sure you went through that.
I'm unweaving about a decade worth of this thinking, the way I viewed the world. So I mean, I was only a heavy fundamental evangelical Christian for almost 3 years, but my thought process of, okay, Satan's running things, there's mysteries to this world, there's all of these conspiracies, has been for a very long time. So I have to go back many years and unwind a lot of the programming I've done to myself, a lot of this thinking. And it's brought me to, honestly, this very beautiful and wonderful place of no one has the answers. No one knows. And that's okay. And life is so precious and so short. And this is most likely the only one I will get. And so life has just become so much different for me, because when you have that mindset, that conspiracy, doomsday, end times, like cult-like mindset, you're always anticipating the end of the world, or you're always anticipating this cataclysmic event to happen. And you're kind of making decisions in your life based on, well, maybe in 5 years the economy is going to tank and all hell is going to break loose, or maybe it's only 6 months away and we get to stock up on all this food, and so I'm putting my finances here, or I'm not going to invest my time in this venture because I don't think I have another 5 years of average lifestyle living. So it is a lot to unwind that thinking and say to myself, no, your goals and your dreams are worthy. You have time to do them, pursue them, and stop being such a prepper in your mind, and stop waiting for the end of the world, because every generation has thought they're going to see it. I think of people in World War II, as everything's falling apart around them, people are starving, people are dying by the millions. They're probably like, Jesus is coming back any minute. This is the end. And it didn't happen. And even now, looking back at all those YouTube channels I used to watch, they're still making the same content, still predicting the same end times events 10 years later. So yeah, it's a lot to unwind mentally.
It's amazing how many groups too, when you really look at this history of Christianity, how many of them have set a very specific date where they've like said
Yeah.
it's this exact either at least couple days or this day specifically, and whenever it passes, they come up with some explanation as to why they got their numbers wrong. And they set
Oh
another
yeah.
date for 3 or 4 years from now. And when that passes, they either do it again or they say, well, it did happen, but it was spiritual and invisible. You just didn't see it, but it really happened in the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
It's amazing how that works. Even
Uh-huh.
with entire not just like individual preachers, but whole denominations have done that, and
Mhm.
they just keep on coming up with ways to explain it. So
Oh
when
yeah.
you're neck deep in that though, like it must have been incredibly difficult even just to get started with unpacking it. What were some of the early things that made you question if they were right? I mean, besides just the fact of like Jesus is coming back this day, oh, he didn't come back that day, obviously something's wrong here. But like besides super specific things, like what were some of the generic issues that made you start to wonder if you were on the right track?
It wasn't until I deconverted fully that I started to think maybe all of this conspiracy stuff I've been into for a very long time might not be completely true. So it wasn't until I completely walked away from the Christian faith, because in 2018 I wasn't heavy in the faith. I just believed in the Bible. And I remember very distinctly, I used to like to take long walks. I would, leave our little homestead, go down the street and take long walks to this pond. And I remember one time going over the bridge over the brook we lived on and specifically saying out loud, Jesus, I need you. I want you in my heart. I accept you as my savior. I accept you into my heart. I said to him, please take my life, take my hand, be in control of my life. And then I remember distinctly kind of stepping back and going, okay, am I saved? Did I do it right? Am I good? Am I going to heaven now? There was no radical lifestyle change. I was still drinking, smoking weed, swearing, watching worldly TV, sex outside of marriage, all of that. But I thought it was as simple as just asking him, but there was no huge radical change. So if you had asked me from like 2018 to 2021, are you a Christian? I would have said yes, but it was a cultural Christian. It wasn't like what I would become later on. And I would have said, yeah, I believe the Bible to be true. I believe that Jesus existed. I believe he is the savior. But I didn't fully understand what that meant until a couple years later. And or when the pandemic hit in 2020, both my husband and I lost our jobs. I was a waitress at a truck stop diner, and he was the cook. So we switched shifts. And by now we had our daughter, and we both lost our jobs. We got on the unemployment, and we were just home all the time. We had nothing to do. And so my drinking started to get heavier and heavier because we were just hanging out. It was gorgeous outside, have a couple drinks in the afternoon, whatever. But I was finding that I was doing it almost every day, all the time, as a way to pass time. So that was getting a little out of control. And then James and I started fighting more, and our relationship began to get pretty toxic. And so 2020 was not that great for our relationship, not that great for me mental health wise, physically, my drinking and everything. So in 2021, James and I decided to split up, and he stayed in our cabin that we built, and I moved down to Massachusetts with my dad. And so I'm in the most vulnerable position I've ever been in my life, going through a breakup, wanting to stop drinking, wanting to clean up my health, clean up my mental health, clean up my life a little bit. And that's when I got I got on TikTok and I got onto the Christian algorithm. And so I already have many years of conspiracy thinking, many years of thinking the Bible to be true, end time stuff, knowing I asked Jesus to be my savior, not really knowing what that meant. And then I get on Christian TikTok and they pitch it good. They pitch it real good. And I was like, "Oh my goodness. I am a sinner. I'm dirty. I'm filthy in the eyes of the Lord. I need Jesus as my savior. I owe God a massive debt. I can never repay him. I have sinned so much against the holy God." It was the first time that I believed in my head that being with James outside of marriage was wrong. It was the first time I believed that swearing and the way I dressed and the way I talked and the things I watched were all sinful and wrong. And I was like, whoa, I am gross. In the eyes of a holy God, I am filthy, filthy, filthy. So when I was living with my dad in Massachusetts, after watching TikTok for a while, the Christian side of TikTok, I realized I didn't do it right. I wasn't really saved when I asked back in 2018. I really do need to get saved now.
That is a fascinating part of the story, and it's amazing how too I think certain preachers can really just preach it well, and they can get in there and you're, especially when you're vulnerable, which it sounds like
Yeah.
you were at that point.
Mm-hmm.
If your relationships are falling apart, your finances are falling apart, you just
Mm-hmm.
want to get back to a healthy part of your life and reclaim your power a little bit. And you just feel like you're powerless.
Yeah.
When you're that vulnerable and they preach it right, you really feel like, yeah. The idea of like you've messed it up, it does feel like in some ways that we've all messed it up, and we do mess up our lives. That's a truism. We
Sure.
all have lack of wisdom at times and make foolish decisions, and we're not as good about what we eat or everything and how we take care of our bodies. And so we do feel like I've got to get back on track. And it's almost like Christianity becomes an Alcoholics Anonymous, not
Yeah.
necessarily for alcohol, but just for life anonymous. Like your
Yeah.
life choices can be better, and we can as a community bring you back on target. But specifically the preaching thing, that of course that was my path. I was trying to be a preacher myself. What
Hmm.
were some of the specific things that you heard the preachers say that really convicted you, that got you to the point of giving your life to Christ?
Yeah, so just back up just real quick. When I forgot to mention this part, when I was living in the cabin with James and we were downloading all those videos, we came across a Baptist preacher named Charles Lawson. Pastor Charles Lawson. He's very big on YouTube.
Yep.
He preaches out of Knoxville, Tennessee, and he was the kind of preacher that was not afraid to go there. He would talk about the conspiracy side of thing. He would talk about the end times. He would go there, and that's what I was always looking for. And so he was my first introduction to evangelical Christian preaching, and I watched him all that. I listened to like every sermon of his, and I would cry and I would weep, and I'd be like, "This is so good," but just still didn't understand. When I ended up on the Christian side of TikTok, I didn't really listen to pastors. It was more people my age and people I related to who either converted to the faith, who Jesus helped them give up their alcohol, their drug addiction, whatever it was. They have these beautiful, amazing testimonies. It was more life inspiring content creators. I didn't really deviate from Pastor Charles Lawson in my preaching. It wasn't until I fully converted that I actually started listening to more reformed preaching. It was the TikTok side was more, these people are relatable. They're my age. They're young women. They've cleaned up their lives. And I was like, I want this. So there is this one woman who's like, you're going to take a 30-day challenge. You're going to stop drinking for 30 days. You're going to exercise for 30 minutes for 30 days. You're going to eat healthy, and you're going to read your Bible. And I had never read my Bible. I had one, but it was dusty on the shelf. And I said, okay, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to want Jesus, if I'm going to want the Christian life, well, I should probably read the book. So I went to Barnes and Noble and I bought this pretty floral Bible, and I got all the highlighters. And I was like, there's no way I'm starting in the Old Testament. There's no way. So I started in Matthew, and I dedicated myself 30 days. I missed a few days here and there, but I read a chapter a day. And that's when the full weight of everything really hit me. And then my dad and I bought a house, the house I'm living in now, together. And I moved into this house and I was alone, and I started not watching any kind of worldly TV and movies. I only listened to very emotional Christian music. So in my infancy of Christianity, I was listening to Hillsong and Bethel and Jesus movement and all of that because I didn't know any better. Once you get into the more reformed circles, they're like, no, 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 don't listen to that. But that's what I was listening to. It was always playing in the house, and it was so emotional and so beautiful. And I was like, this is the life I want. But I was trapped in two worlds. I was still drinking, so I would drink, feel guilty, go to Jesus and say, I'm sorry, help me. Drink, feel guilty, go to Jesus. And that continued for about like 2 months after I moved into this house. And this is where Bob and Sally come back into the story, because I told you I had been communicating with them for about 8 years. And so I reached out to Sally and I said, hey, I think I want to be a Christian. I am believing in Jesus. I'm believing in the Bible. I don't know if I'm fully saved. All I know is I want to be around people who know Jesus. And so they had left Arizona by that point. They were out in northern Oregon near Acadia Bay. And they're like, we're flying you out. We're flying you out. We're going to talk. Because, I mean, they're over the moon. They're like, this hippie new age girl that was smoking weed and drinking and dressing like a crazy hippie girl. Now she's wanting to be a Christian. This is amazing. So they flew me right out. And I would say that was the absolute defining moment where I fully converted, gave my life to Christ, felt like I had the Holy Spirit in me, and my life just radically changed from there.
Hmm. That's
Mhm.
amazing. And that's in the sense of from their perspective, I'm sure that was the pinnacle of what they could have prayed for, to be, and especially be able to kind of corner you, not to say it was like predatory per se, but just to corner you, to have you in their home, in their life there for a few days, and to know that like the whole point of that visit was just to talk about Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Like that's as good as it gets. That's what you pray for
Yes.
and hope for. And
Yes.
that's the money shot.
Uh-huh.
When you were there, what was the actual like conversion? Like what did you pray to make sure you were saved?
So we spent about 12 hours almost every single day from sun up to sundown on their couch talking Bible. It was like Christianity 101. I had a plethora of questions and they had all the answers. And I trusted Bob and Sally as much as you can trust another human being. I believed everything they told me to be 100% true because of the way they lived. Because I knew them in Arizona. I saw that they were continuing in that lifestyle. They had done it 25 years prior to me meeting them. I was like, these people know Jesus and they know their Bible. So I was struggling with things like glorifying God. I didn't know what that meant. It sounded kind of egotistical to me, like God needs all this glory kind of thing. And they explained it to me in a way of, well, it's not like that. It's if you show the attributes of God, people will know God through you. And I just remember crying like a baby at that thought. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. And so we spent these long sessions in their trailer just talking about everything Christian 101. And in my time out there, they introduced me to people at their church and they introduced me to three families. And these families have 10, 9, 8 plus children. And they all were devoted Christians. And when I looked at them, I said, wow, this is what it looks like to be highly blessed and favored by God. I want this. And I also want my daughter to behave and act like these super well behaved, wonderful, godly children. And so that was like a first pang in my heart where I was like, oh, I've really been doing it wrong. I like my daughter's very well behaved, but she's not this godly. She's not this calm and quiet at church. It's not like this. And so I remember watching those families and going, I want what they have so bad. And then we just spent a ton of time talking about it. And I remember asking Bob and saying, can I get baptized? Well, it was just, there was like a deep desire to be baptized. And he was like, yes, absolutely. So we went out to the Columbia River in Oregon, and it was Bob and the pastor of the church and a bunch of people I had met out in Oregon, and Sally was there, and it was so beautiful. And that's when he asked me those series of questions like, are you professing faith in the Lord Jesus Christ as your personal savior? Do you believe that he rose from the dead with all of your heart and that he's living in heaven at the right hand of the Father today? Are you making this a public profession? So when he went through all those questions and when I said yes, I said it with all of my heart. And I would say that when I answered yes to all of that, and then when I was baptized, that was conversion. That was it. And I came up out of those waters as a brand new woman, and my life wasn't the same for almost 3 years. I mean, I radically changed.
Mm.
And yeah, I would say that was the moment of like real true conversion.
Well, praise the Lord. I guess the interview's done.
Yeah, okay. Nice to meet you, Tim. Take care.
So glad you gave your life to the Lord. Yeah, that's where it's at. That's again, that's the money shot.
Yeah, it really is the high, and it pains me to sit here not believing that anymore because they were so good to me, and I love them dearly, and I know this is as real to them as the air they breathe. But so that brings me a little bit of pain to be in this place towards them. But yeah,
Sure.
that was the money shot for them. That was the highlight of their life. They told me that many times, and so yeah, it does pain me a little bit to be saying that I don't believe it anymore, and I know they know.
And it's hard, yeah. And it's a lot of us too, even if we don't have friends that would fit in that category, just a lot of us have parents, or at least one parent that
Mhm.
was in that. And my parents both led all of us to the Lord.
Mm.
And my dad's passed, but my mom is still living. And when she found out I was an atheist, it broke her heart. She's publicly said, "I wish I were dead." Not me,
Oh,
but her. Like, she wants to be dead
oh,
because
oh,
she's brought a child into the world knowing that that child is now on the way to hell. And it's like, that pains her exponentially. And it's hard because that they did it out of the goodness of their heart, out of
yes,
love. They
yes,
weren't trying to be deceptive.
no,
They were trying to do the very best thing in the world for us, both for time and eternity. And the thing that's hard is just when you do deconvert, because of the process that I'm sure you're going to get to in a few minutes. But when you do deconvert, you realize that you can have really good intentions. And like, this is what they would have said to atheists, but I'll say it back to them. You can have really good intentions, but you can still be completely wrong.
mm,
And the question we used to ask with when we were witnessing, we would start by saying, if you were to die today,
mm,
what would you say to God if he was to say, why should I let you into heaven? And most people would say, well, I'm a pretty good person. I haven't killed anybody. I try to be honest and love people. I'm a good guy. And the answer, of course, we would say is, if that's the wrong answer, would you like to know? Which
sure,
is
yeah,
obviously as arrogant as it comes.
yeah, yeah,
But what we would then say is, do you understand that according to the Bible, even your good works are like filthy rags? And God has
mm,
said that even if you've done one little thing wrong, you've broken his law, and that if
yes,
you've broken it, you do deserve punishment, and that you can't earn that back. You can't be good enough. You can't, like, it's not scales where you say, well, I did a little white lie, but I also did a lot of charity work. So I'm in good stead. You have to say, no, you've done something, and that's tipped the scales to the point where you deserve to be eternally punished.
yeah,
And then you would then bring in, of course, the idea of what you need is not to do a better job at good works. What you need to do is have someone rescue you from
yeah,
your sin and cover you. And when we would say that to people, we would give them that message so strongly. But the thing that I realized, and my mom, of course, would have said, something like that, and my church leaders and Sunday school teachers. But the thing that when you deconvert, you realize it's missing in that is that they never step back first and intellectually give you the information to say, let me tell you where all these whole ideas came from, where this book came from. Of course, they're going to, give you that squeaky clean version of, like, this book came from God, and this book came from inspired men who got it, gave it to us to them. But they never really talk about, like, where the mythology came from. And of course, they
mm,
wouldn't call it mythology, but they're like, even some of the most basic information, like, where did the Yahweh character come from? What is the earliest information we have about Yahweh and
mm-hmm,
about Elyon and about Asherah? Even just that, before you get anywhere near the Gospels, it's like it falls apart. But the fact that they just ignore all that and think it's irrelevant or it's satanic in some way,
mm-hmm,
they come with this party line, and you end up in a spot where, when you do deconvert, you realize you all were very sincere, but you were gravely mistaken, and you are gravely ignorant. And
mm-hmm,
I cannot justify living my life based on a worldview that is that gravely ignorant and that gravely mistaken. But it's
Oh
just
yeah,
it's heartbreaking because like you said, they meant well. They were
absolutely.
good people, fairly good
Yeah,
people.
absolutely. Yeah, so they were very good people. They deeply cared and do care about me. But I would even say that they if they ever heard that Yahweh was part of some kind of mythology, that would immediately be thrown away in 1 second as either a satanic attack, an attack from the enemy, or just a way to divert people from believing in Christ. I mean, they wouldn't entertain that thought for 2 seconds. So I
Yeah.
don't even think that when they go out and evangelize or try and get people to come to the Lord, that that is even ever a thought process of theirs. And most of the people that I hung around with when I got involved in the church here in Maine. So when I came back from Oregon as this new creature in Christ, and I was living in the Spirit, and I was just completely on fire, James wasn't converted. So I went to him, I'm like, hey, remember all this stuff about the Bible we were learning on YouTube and all this stuff about Jesus? Well, it's true. It's true. And I was so hyped up. I'm like, you need to get saved. Like, you're a sinner. And went through the whole spiel with him. And he was like, oh, okay. All right. And so what I would do, because I was immediately, Bob and Sally immediately put me on to John MacArthur. And so that's all I listened to was John MacArthur. And
Mm.
again, I thought this man had all the answers, right? So I'm like, whoa, okay, this thing about the faith, this thing about the faith. Oh, you need to look for fruits of the spirit. Oh, you'll know them by their fruit. So I got to be looking at people and judging their salvation based on how they live and what they're doing and what they're into. So I went back out to Oregon a second time. So I was out there in June, and then I went out there in August of 2021. And in August, I brought my daughter out there to meet all the kids and all the families. And a huge part of that 10-day trip was talking about biblical marriage. And so it was like session two, another, 10, 12 hours on the couch talking, and, my daughter's playing with the kids and whatever. And they're like, if James gets saved, you guys should probably get back together and unite the family, because Satan wants your family split up. I mean, it's not very biblical for you to have a child outside of marriage and be single all your life. You should think about marrying James, kind of thing. So after that trip, I start going to the church here in Maine. So the pastor of that church and Bob are in cahoots, and we're all kind of waiting to see if James gets saved. And so, I'm looking, I'm like, well, he's still into that, probably not saved. Well, he's still into that, probably not saved. Eventually, James would stop his drug of choice, which was marijuana. And that was something that he had been doing for a very long time. And when I saw him do that, and then he told me he went to someone that he had wronged and apologized and asked for forgiveness, I was like, oh, he's getting saved. This is a saved man. Like, he's coming to the Lord, definitely. Because I was always pushing him about salvation. I'm like, you're gonna end up in a bad place if you don't get saved. And Jesus is the truth. I mean, he claims that. Like, we've been searching for this for 10 years. Like, I finally found the truth. I want you to have it. And so he made a profession of faith. And when I look back at this, I don't know why I allowed myself to be in this position, but pretty much the pastor of my church and Bob would be the final say on whether James and I could get married or not, because they had to make sure he was really a saved man and that he didn't just want to get back together with me and pretending like he was saved. So they were looking for his fruit, and I was there as his advocate, right? And so finally they had this big call, and they talked to James, and they they asked him questions like, did you ask Christ to save you? What does it mean to be a sinner? What does salvation mean to you? And apparently he answered right. And they're like, yeah, he's a saved man for sure. You guys can get married. And we're like, yay, we can get married. And so that was all in August. And by October of 2021, we were married. We had a little backyard wedding. Bob and Sally flew out from the West Coast in this dramatic fashion. Their flight got canceled. We were all praying they'd get another flight. I found them a last minute flight. They got here an hour before the wedding. It was all of the Lord. And it was just confirmation that now I was a blessed child of God. God was on my side. I had the Lord working my life out for me now. And they came out and married us. The pastor was there. Many people from our church were there. My mom was very hesitant about this because my mom grew up Jehovah's Witness, and she never carried that into our childhood. But that's how her mom raised her. So when I was going through this, she was like, oh no. She saw a lot of red flags, but I was a brick wall. I was like, I took the Bible verse seriously, where it's like, you need to hate mother, brother, daughter, son, and love me instead, pretty much. Put me before every relationship. So I took that very seriously. And so we got married, and James came and moved into the house that my dad and I bought together, and we started our married Christian lifestyle together.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
and at that point, from a Christian perspective, that's the, I mean, that's just a great outcome for all the things you'd been through.
Yeah.
Um, so everybody's cheering. I'm obviously, catching up here with this. Everybody's cheering. Everybody's happy.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's saying this is exactly what we were praying for. The
Mm-hmm.
Lord is clearly at work.
Mm-hmm.
You're starting your marriage off. I know we're already together, but you're starting your marriage off with the Lord as the center. It must have felt like you were on cloud nine.
I absolutely.
How long did that process or that part of the story last before some of the, early seeds started to come into the equation?
The honeymoon phase lasted for a while. I mean, I was just all about my Bible, all about prayer, all about everything to do with the church. James and I are praying together, reading our Bibles together, trying to raise our daughter up in the Lord. I was just completely on cloud nine with the new relationship I had with Christ. I felt like a forgiven sinner. I felt like I realized that my future was so amazing because I had heaven and the new earth to look forward to. I had eternal life. I didn't have to worry about damnation and hell, even though I never had before. I didn't start worrying about it until I became a Christian. But I was just so happy, and my Bible time was the most precious time to me. If I could have, I would have spent every day, all day in the Word, just reading and studying, and I loved it. So I wanted, because of how long we had been searching for truth and now believing we had finally found it, and God had given us a book of truth. And I'm a reader and I like studying, and I thought I found the truth yet again. That's all I wanted to do was read the truth. And so I spent so much time reading the Bible. And just to be completely honest, I struggled with the Old Testament. Like I really tried. I mean, I always did Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and the Song of Solomon and Ruth and those more gentle ones, but I couldn't do Kings and I couldn't do Numbers and all of that. It was just too much. So at the time, I didn't fully understand all the atrocities in the Old Testament. I was always in the New Testament. Like, this is beautiful and wonderful, and I love it. And so, yeah, we were in a honeymoon for a while. It wasn't until we went on a missions trip to Oregon that the rose-colored glasses fell off. We started to see things very differently, and the honeymoon phase just abruptly ended.
Hmm. What was the missions trip to do?
So that was directly with Bob and Sally. They had moved more south in Oregon, and they were working at a plywood mill with the owner of the plywood mill and his family. And he owned that plywood mill, and he had a ton of people coming over the border from Mexico and working there for him. And these people obviously have no money. They have just left their family. They're in vulnerable positions. And he said, "Hey, I've got all these guys that don't know Jesus and are on their way to hell if they don't get saved. And we have such a grand ministry opportunity. I need someone to help me do this." And so Bob and Sally came in, and they're like, "That's what we do. We do ministry like this. This is our life." And so they got involved, and they wanted to start this huge ministry operation. I mean, they were talking houses, halfway houses for drug addicts. They were talking a safe house for abused and battered women. They're talking ministry on a grand scale. So they formed a team. They had to form a team. And so they called James and I, they called a couple from LA. They had a couple already there in Oregon. They had the family of the plywood mill, and they were just forming a team. And they were like, you I already wanted to get serious about Christ, and I didn't want to continue to live the average American lifestyle, and they were always pushing us in that direction, like, "Hey, yeah, you go to church on Sunday, and yeah, you're heavily involved in your church." I taught Sunday school, I did VBS, I was in the choir, I sang solos in the choir, I was at Wednesday night prayer meeting, Sunday morning service, Sunday night. I mean, I'm just heavily involved in our independent fundamental Baptist church. And just real quick, if we could go back to my time in that church, and then I'll go to the missions trip. Is that okay?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So in the church, I obviously I had no upbringing in the Christian community. So when I entered into this very fundamental Baptist church, I just thought this was the way that Christian life was lived. I thought that the long dresses and long skirts and very conservative dressing and lifestyle was the way the Christian life was meant to live. I thought that you could only listen to very instrumental opera like Christian music, and anything else was too worldly and sinful. Preaching was done a certain way. Living your life was done a certain way. Your relationship with your spouse was done a certain way, and there you couldn't really deviate. And I mean, we're talking like Earth is only 5,000 years old. Evolution is garbage. It's of the devil. Everything was literal. I remember our pastor over and over and over again saying we have to take the Bible literal. Even everything in Revelation is literal. And so that was like my indoctrination going into the Christian faith. And I mirrored what they did because I thought that these people had been in it for so long. I needed to be like that. So my wardrobe changed. I dressed super, super conservative, baggy, long shirt, long skirts, no makeup, never did my hair. I changed my wardrobe completely. When I was in the choir, I was told that the way I sang was too sexual because I would slide my notes instead of singing like da da da. I would slide them, and that was too worldly. So I had to change the way I sang, the way I talked, the things I was interested in. I used the word passion in a conversation one time, and my pastor made this like really like upset looking face, and he was like, "Well, passion, the word passion, that's not good." And so all these things that are just part of our normal human experience were now deemed really sinful and bad. And because my number one priority was to please God and to please the Lord, I didn't want to do these bad things anymore. So I changed my behavior and I changed my life radically when I got involved in the Fundamental Baptist Church in our area.
Hmm. I can definitely relate to a lot of that. I grew up in a Baptistic environment. My dad was always trying to lean us towards fundamental Baptist churches, and I went to a school called Bob Jones University. Ever
Yeah,
heard of that one?
that's where my
That's
pastor and his wife went.
oh, that's bad news. Bad
Yeah,
news bears.
I figured
Um,
that out later on.
yeah, but I definitely can relate to that. Yeah, you do get in that sense of like none of these rules are in the Bible,
No.
but like it's just like this is what we do, and if you deviate, you are a bad person. And
Yeah.
eventually, it's funny. Some people kind of reject it at first, like it feels kind of weird,
Mm.
but something happens, and I say this because it happened to me when I first went to Bob Jones. My first semester, and I was only there for 1 year, 2 semesters total, but my first semester, I was kind of like, this feels too restrictive. And something switched, and I thought, you know what? In our fight to be against the world system, against ungodliness, a lot of these things probably are exactly where we need to be. And by the second semester, I honestly loved it. I thought this is the place where I can thrive. And
Mm.
I had to, I'll tell you a story another time, but I had to leave for something that was going on with my brother who was also there. I had to leave. My parents were asking me to please pick a different Bible college, and I went to another one that was much more liberal comparatively, even though it was very conservative, liberal comparative to Bob Jones. But I remember just thinking, oh my gosh, like I can't. I was now so deep in it at Bob Jones that to go to a conservative school but liberal compared to them was just too much.
Mm.
And I remember when I walked in the boys' dorm, the men's dorm, it was like there was a poster up of the Beatles, and I just thought, oh, oh my God, like where have I landed? A poster of the Beatles in a guy's dorm at the Bible college? Like no, no, no. The Beatles have nothing to do with what should be all about here. Obviously, I was way, way out there, but it was a hard sell. It was a hard thing. And but you get used to that stuff and
Yeah.
it feels so good. And especially
Mhm.
when if you are big into the sheltering too, where you don't have liberal Christians and progressive Christians that are kind of in your inner circle, if you just kind of weed them out, so to speak, it's like all the good people I know are doing this exact lifestyle. So
Yeah.
this is good. It's good stuff. And
Yeah.
it feels very safe.
So the people that I was with in that church in up here in Maine, they look on the outside like they live that that lifestyle, and I believe most of them did. And then you start to get to know people more, and you're like, well, I see some hypocrisy here, and I don't see it fully in your life. Or how come you're not more dedicated to your Bible time? How come you're not praying more? Like, when was the last time you told someone about the gospel? I noticed all those things, and I would pick up on that in the 3 years that we were in that church. But I looked up to my pastor and his wife very much, and they also had a bunch of kids that they raised, very fundamental. And so I was really close with one of their daughters, and I looked up to her in the way she lived, and I just kind of morphed into that very fundamental aspect of Christianity. And I just shut myself off from the bad things of the world, the bad TV, the bad music, the bad video games, no drinking, no swearing, no smoking, no living this kind of lifestyle. I was completely shut off from it. And I was always looking at my husband being like, well, I hope you follow exactly like how I'm doing it, right? I was always judging his walk with the Lord based on what I thought was right. And he would still play some worldly video games and watch some worldly movies. And I would always be like, oh no, has the devil got him? Just the fear. And something I noticed is that Christians are so afraid of the devil, even though we're supposed to be victorious in Christ. And so I always find that kind of weird, but I was always worried that Satan was getting in between our marriage and that kind of stuff. And we had a Bible study form from people in our church, about 30 of us. And we would go to each other's houses about twice a month, and we split up, men and women, did our separate Bible studies, came back together, had a big potluck meal. We sang, we prayed, we fellowshiped for hours. And that became the highlight of my life. I mean, that we did that twice a month, and I always look forward to it. And then my husband and I were part of a smaller group we called the small group, because some of these people didn't want to associate with some of the people in the bigger Bible study because of theological differences. Like, they didn't want to be a part of the bigger Bible study because the bigger Bible study was more Arminian than it was Calvinism. And so we just kind of were able to float between both camps, both worlds, and we got along with pretty much everyone. And we had our big Bible study and then our small group. And that was almost every weekend of every month for about a year, maybe a year and a half. So that was a massive part of my Christian life with everyone. And then just hyper involved in the church, heavy into the fundamental way of Christianity. And kind of as time went by, I was noticing that what was being preached from the pulpit was not what I was reading in the Bible. There were some things that in like what I was studying and what I was noticing in the Bible, I didn't understand how the pastor was preaching this or how pastors were drawing this conclusion. And it mostly revolved around the whole pre-trib, post-trib thing. Because I know that John MacArthur, Bob and Sally, my church, they were all pre-trib. And so I believed that at first. But my nature is to look into things. So I was like, well, I wonder what other people have to say about this. And when I got into the post-trib camp, I was like, well, this makes way more sense biblically. So then I started to have a theological difference with the people that I ran with. And that was like my first time of kind of getting into the theology of Christianity and realizing that I was going to have differences from the pre-trib Baptist fundamental teachings. And I kind of leaned more towards the lone wolf preachers, more people who incorporated the conspiracy theories and the things happening in current events into end times prophecy. I went back into that realm, and that's who I gravitated towards before we went out for our missions trip. So I kind of already felt like a slight divide in the way I saw things compared to the people that I was around in my Christian circles. But it wouldn't get as bad as it did until right before our deconversion, when we started questioning the whole hell doctrine.
And so that's at that point though, you went out to do the missions trip. And what happened on the missions trip that shook things up even further?
So, like I said, Bob and Sally are very, very radical, and they believe as a Christian you should live a certain way. You shouldn't be investing your money in things of the world. I mean, we're talking nice houses, nice clothes, nice vacations, nice anything really. Everything that you have should be used and go to the Lord. And so that was kind of their expectation for us when we were coming out there. And James and I were really in that headspace. We were studying the book of Luke, where Jesus is talking about forsaking everything to follow him. You cannot be his disciple if you don't forsake everything and follow him. You need to die to yourself. You need to give up the things of the world and only focus on the Lord. And we saw a lot of people within our Christian circles here in Maine weren't living like that. There was no radicalness. There was no desire to help the homeless or the poor, the downtrodden or the broken. It was more, I'm going to go to church on Sunday. We'll have our little Bible study and fellowship, and that's it. And so James and I became bothered by that. And within our group, we really tried to push people. We tried to be like, hey, we should get way more radical for Jesus. Like, let's go down to Portland and evangelize the homeless, or let's start, a backyard dinner for people and try to win souls to Christ. And people became uncomfortable by us. They're like, you're getting way too radical, way too fast. We don't like this. And so we had some people kind of snap on us and get a little angry with us. So we were like, well, no one wants to do it here in Maine, and we know it's happening out in Oregon. Bob and Sally are trying to build this big ministry. Let's get radical for Jesus. And we were getting so intense about it that we still had our property where we built the cabin on. We would have long conversations about selling that to fund this missions trip. We weren't going to ask the church for money. We didn't want to do it like that. So we were just going to sell our land and take that money to go out west and to invest it in the ministry. And the owner of the plywood mill was like, well, don't, pull the trigger on that quite yet. So he got us out there, and we had a little road trip out there. We went to go see the Ark encounter, and we went to the Creation Museum, and we ended up going down to Knoxville, Tennessee to listen to that preacher we had been listening to since 2018. So we got to meet him. And when we were out in Oregon, it was really cool at first. We were really, really excited to be there. They had huge, huge dinners every Sunday night at the plywood mill. All the people would come there. Bob would preach a sermon. There would be a call to get saved. I mean, it was very emotional, very big. We were seeing people start to come to Christ, and a lot of the people, there was a language barrier from the people from Mexico to us. So that was kind of tricky, but it felt really cool because it felt like you were really doing something big for the Lord. And we really liked it at first, but then we quickly began to notice that our time and our finances were being controlled. And there was a tremendous amount of guilt if we weren't living 100% radical to Jesus every single moment of our life. Like, instead of going to a Spanish class with some of the people from Mexico that we were supposed to be evangelizing to, we went and watched the sunset on the lake and went fishing as a family. And we were guilt tripped for that. Like, you should have been there. Your leadership in the ministry, you should have been at the Spanish class. And we were like, okay. And then when we sat down and looked at our finances, my husband has his own carpentry business. So for the first time in our entire life, he's making decent money. And it was nice because we've always been broke. We've never had money. And so he left that job behind to go out to Oregon, and he was just making, small hourly wage again, working for the guy at the plywood mill. And we brought our concerns to Bob and Sally, and we said, hey, we've taken a huge pay cut, and even this isn't covering some bills we still have, and the ability to have fun, to live, to go out to eat, to take our daughter to an arcade, to go somewhere, gas money and stuff. And they were not happy about that. They were kind of like, you should live very small, like almost poor, because that's a better testimony. That's a better way to show people you have the joy of the Lord. You don't need this material stuff. So we noticed our finances and our time was being controlled. At that point, I had stopped listening to John MacArthur. I did not like him anymore. I could not get down with Calvinism. I could not believe in a God that would predestine people to hell and would know beforehand that this group of people was going to end up in hell and still create them. And he actually chose that. I couldn't, and I no longer believed in the pre-trib. I just thought I did not see it in the Bible. So I had a ton of theological differences than Bob and Sally, and they knew I didn't want to listen to John MacArthur anymore, because whenever I'd ask them a harder question, they would always just send me a John MacArthur sermon. And I'd be like, well, I kind of just want your answer, but their answer was always John MacArthur's answer. So when I said, hey, I don't want to listen to this guy anymore, I don't think Bob was too happy about it. So one day, just super randomly, he started giving me a really hard time about it. And he pushed me and pushed me about 3 times throughout the day. And I felt really uncomfortable by that and kind of upset about that. And we were living in a trailer on the property of the plywood mill, and we did not know that that was an illegal living situation. So I had gotten extremely ill with the flu and a double eye infection. It was awful. And I was in bed for about a week. I missed all the meetings and Bible studies and everything. So I was already feeling bad about myself. And it was the day, like the first day I was able to be out of bed and be okay. We get a knock on the door of the trailer, and it's Bob. And he's like, I hate to tell you guys, but we got to move you now. Like right now, you need to move out of this trailer and get out of here. And we were like, what? And he's like, yeah, apparently this is an illegal living situation. The owner of the plywood mill kind of knew it, but someone called and told on us, and the state is coming tomorrow to look at permits, and you guys can't be here. So my husband's in the shower. I'm still like woozy and sick. My daughter's watching Lilo and Stitch drinking a smoothie. And I'm like, they're moving us. And then a knock on the door again, and there's 20 young men right outside our trailer. And they just come in, set up cardboard boxes, throw our entire lives in. We had bought furniture at this point because we'd been out there for about a month to 2 months. Threw everything, cardboard boxes, moved all of our furniture, broke everything down, moved us across town to some random house, all in an hour and a half. And so
That's
now we're
crazy.
just sitting, yeah. Now we're just sitting in this random house, and we're going, what is going on? Why is this a part of our missions trip out here? And that's when we started to feel really uncomfortable. The owner of the plywood mill was treating my husband pretty bad. He was very snappy. He had no fruits of the spirit and was just very snappy, rude, mean. And we were just starting to see that there was no real direction, that this was more turning into a cult-like environment rather than a decent Christian ministry. Whoever had the most money was sitting on top, making all the decisions, our time, our resources, everything was being controlled. And we were just like, we need to get out of here. And the plywood mill owner eventually was like, yeah, maybe it's a good idea if you guys leave. And Bob and Sally were pretty heartbroken, but we got out of there within about 2.5 months. It just was not a good situation.
So they had never really researched if the whole thing was legal from the beginning, it sounds like.
I don't
That's,
know. It was never said to us, but I know the plywood mill owner knew it wasn't legal to be living there.
that's crazy.
And so then once someone called the state and they were coming out, we had to be gone. And they just put us in some random house that was on the market that he owned,
Yeah.
and didn't really say much to us. It got so weird so fast. And it was the complete opposite of anything I thought it would. I mean, I thought we were going to be out there seeing people come to the Lord, and we were going to be really working. And there was talk of, going down to Mexico and going on missions trips outside of the United States. And I was just over the moon excited for this. And it nosedived so fast. There was no direction. It was pretty much a mess. It really was.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
How did that relate? I mean, I know that we could say that's a mess, but those people that could have foreseen it and gotten the right permits or whatever, or made different arrangements, they didn't do their due diligence. They didn't make the right choices. How
Mhm.
did that relate though to the sense of your relationship with God, and whether or not he had opened these doors and what his plan was? Like, did you feel like you were still tight with him? Like, God, I guess this is crazy, but people might be making mistakes. People might be not foreseeing the issues, but I know that in your perfect will and your perfect plan, you knew all this was going to happen. So I trust you. Was it like that? Or was it like, what the hell, God?
No, I wasn't mad at God at all. I was exactly like what you just said. I knew it was in his will. I
Okay.
trusted him. I knew he brought us out there for a reason. I knew he was trying to teach us something. I was not mad at the Lord at all. I did not start doubting the truth of God, the truth of Jesus, the truth of the gospel. What I did start doubting and what I did start deconstructing was the Christian culture, the fundamental Christian culture. Because when I was really sick in bed, I hopped on YouTube, which I just do, and I started researching homeschool curriculum for my daughter. And I came across a YouTube channel about a girl telling her story about growing up in fundamental Christianity. And my eyes were just open to, wow, I mean, her parents shut her off to everything. They didn't let her do anything. She was always home, no interaction with other kids outside of church, not allowed to participate in any extracurricular activities, anything like that. And I was just like, I do not want that for my daughter. And then I just started to really question, does God really care about my skirt length? Does God really care if I live in a nice house? Like, didn't he provide that for me? Isn't that a blessing? All good things come from the Lord. Isn't that a wonderful thing God gave me? Do I really need to feel shame that, my husband's making good money with his business? Do I need to feel shame that we want to travel and go on vacations and do these things? So I really started to deconstruct the fundamental Christian culture and the way that Bob and Sally taught me I needed to live as a Christian. And when we left Oregon, that was kind of when my relationship with them really fell apart, because I no longer believed that what they had taught me and how I needed to live was true anymore. And I just came to this place like, that's not Christianity. There's no way that Jesus cares about all these things. It just can't be. But I had a hard time justifying the parts in Luke that said you must forsake all things with grace and good gifts from God and the natural human inclination for comfort, for protecting yourself, for having nice things in life. I mean, it's just in our human nature to better our lives. And the way that Christianity, especially if you take it super seriously, teaches you to live is almost like a poor, broke monk in a way. Don't have nice things, forsake the world. And I just started to think that that was ridiculous. But I didn't question Jesus, and I didn't question the faith at that time.
Gotcha. It's interesting that the path you took there, with saying that poverty is not necessarily what God is calling us all to. Certainly, we could say he calls some people to it, but it's not wrong to have wealth. Mm-hmm. And even like Solomon had, all kinds of wealth, arguably, if he had been real. But when you look at that dynamic, it reminds me a lot of the Roman Catholic stuff. And I know you weren't in the Catholics church at that point, but when you look at the monks and the nuns, where there's the vows of poverty so forth, living in these monasteries, many of them, I went through a phase where I was really into the music of a guy named John Michael Talbot. You know that name? Mm-hmm. He's a monk, but he's also a singer, and he's a very, very beautiful singer, great voice, and he's got all these albums, but that are all focused on like Catholic liturgy and Catholic ideas, and a lot of it though is it would fit in with a Christian music as well. You could play a lot of his stuff in a Christian church and you'd never even think of it as Catholic. But he had this one album where he was taking the poetry of monks that had lived years ago, like St. Francis of Assisi, and the whole idea of like giving up your possessions for the kingdom. I remember this one song is called "The Laudable Exchange." So like the laudable meaning praiseworthy. You exchange this life for the one to come.
Yes.
You give up everything. You give up everything now to gain everything in the future.
Yes.
And it was very appealing. I can see that appeal, and I can see why people fall in that category of like, why would you want to hold on to things when you can get them all anyway? And there's what's that quote from Jim Elliot? He is no fool to give up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. And that idea of like, there's so much of a contrast between these little things you could give up here and the beauty of what you're going to get in heaven for it. And I definitely see their side of it. But it's when you really step back too, it's like, why can't I spend some time, especially like with my family vacations? Because that's critical. And I remember reading and hearing a lot of stories of pastors and missionaries who would actually lose their families because they were doing so much, where maybe it was the mom and the kids at home, the pastor, the missionary would go out all the time and do stuff, And when the kids grow up, they're like, we don't know who our dad is.
Yeah.
And they would have this great ministry, but you
Mhm.
lost your family. Was that worth it? And yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. And another part of the whole experience with Oregon too is there was a lot of fear mongering and manipulation. We were told this crazy story about, oh yeah, because they wanted us to go live in the worst trailer park in that part of Oregon. And it was just known to be riddled with drugs and very, very unsafe for a small child. But they're like, you guys can go in there and win everyone to Christ. And then that place will get cleaned up and everyone will be cool. And they're like, do you guys want to do that? And I said to James, I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to bring my daughter into that environment. That worries me. And we were met with, well, do you not trust God? You must not trust God fully then, because if God wants you to go there, he'll protect you. He'll protect your daughter. And we were given this story about a missionary family who had two small boys, and they went out into the jungle to be missionaries to some tribes out there. And the boys were always trying to play with the poisonous snakes, and the mom was like, they're too little for this. We need to go back home, let them grow up a bit, then we can come back out into the mission field. Like, she was worried for the safety of her children. Well, they came back, moved back into their mobile home in Texas, and underneath the mobile home was a pit of rattlesnakes. The boys ended up playing in the pit of rattlesnakes. One of them got bit. The father put him in the car, backed the car up to rush to the hospital, ends up running over his other child. The mother witnesses all, dies of a heart attack, and the father just loses his whole family in a matter of 5 seconds. We were told this story as a way to make us go to the trailer park to evangelize for Christ. And my husband, I'm so grateful for him. He's like, that is fear manipulation. That's not okay. And so that wasn't subtle. That was a big one. But those subtle kind of things were given to us in our time out in Oregon. If you really trust the Lord, you would do X, Y, and Z. If you have great faith, you will do this, or you won't be afraid of that. God will protect you. And I just think as a mother, I'm glad I went with my instinct, and I'm glad my husband stepped up, because I think that's irresponsible to put your children in a position like that, to hope that people will come to what I now know not to be real, but come to Jesus and transform their lives. But the reality of all of the people in the trailer park doing that was very small. And that was kind of eye-opening for us. So that was another part of us leaving, and our relationship kind of breaking with Bob and Sally. And yeah, that was very disappointing. And that did bother me for a while, and that did cause a lot of fear in me. And for the next, I'm trying to get the time, it was like 2022, so about the next year, I had a little bit of fear of God, not the good kind where you're in awe of him. I had the, oh, if I don't do this, is he going to strike me dead? If I don't do this, is he going to kill my daughter because I don't have great faith? I had that fear in me now. And that was very toxic. And I was constantly, constantly feeling guilty about the things I would do. Like if I sat down to do a painting, or if I sat down and watched TV, or did something pleasurable, swim in my pool, go on a walk through the woods, I would feel guilt, because in that moment I wasn't winning a soul to Christ. And I felt like God was not pleased with me. And so it became a toxic, abusive relationship that I had just created in my head. And that was pretty awful coming home from Oregon. That was really, really difficult.
I can definitely relate to that's that idea too, of like you need to be doing something epic for the Lord. And if you'll
Yeah.
just walk by faith, he will
Mm-hmm.
take care of you, and he'll do things that he can't do with the casual Christians, but he'll do
That's right.
great things with you and transform the world. Yeah, that's the world I came from, so I relate very much.
Mm-hmm.
How did that move from the angst of your relationship with those specific people and that specific version of Christianity to actually like saying maybe Christianity itself as a whole is problematic? Because you could easily say, a lot of people do say, I was in a cult, or I was with a bad church with toxic beliefs, and they don't have any need to leave Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
They just need to leave that teaching or that church, that pastor, or that mentality, and they can go to another 10, 20, 30 churches or more and thrive, and maybe thrive in it for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
You took a different path. What moved you from those questions to the issue of, is Christianity itself the correct worldview?
It was two major things. The first thing was my husband started to question the hell doctrine and the justice in that and how a loving God could do that. And then the other thing was watching all of the division in Christianity and all of the judgment and hate. I mean, just in the circles that I hung out in, everyone was divided on all these theological standpoints. And I started thinking to myself, how can okay, so you're reading the Bible, I'm reading the Bible, you're coming to a different conclusion, I'm coming to a different conclusion. Who's right? Well, I think I'm right, of course, and you think you're right, of course. So we're both arrogant and one of us is wrong. But then you have, at least 500 other different versions of this one theological point that we're both looking at. How are all these people coming to different conclusions when they're reading the same Bible? So I started to allow myself to question that. But it was really once my husband started to question the hell doctrine, we no longer could believe in the normal tenets of the faith. And we went down the path of universal reconciliation. So for maybe about a month to 2 months before we completely deconverted, we're like, there's no way a loving God could have foreknowledge, could have infinite power, and send people to hell. We also came to the conclusion that Jesus could not be victorious if even one soul ended up in hell. That's not a victor. If one soul perishes, goes to the lake of fire, and is tortured for all eternity, Jesus is not king. He's not the victor. And so immediately we knew we were going to get in trouble at our fundamental Baptist church. Once we adopted this new belief system, we knew we were going to get in trouble. And so we had dinner with some of our very close friends, and we told them exactly where they were at. And we're like, we hear you. They were like, we hear you. We know, we get it. We've thought about this. They're very chill, very cool. I'm still friends with the wife and her daughter to this day. But they heard us. They understood. They have friends who believe in universal reconciliation. It's the idea that the lake of fire. Have you heard of this idea?
Yeah, but feel free to explain it.
Yeah. Like, so the lake of fire is a refiner's fire. It's not a torture chamber. So people who did not obey the gospel in this age, they will not reign and rule with Christ on the new earth when he actually comes physically to the earth to reign and rule. They will all go into the lake of fire and they will be refined by God. So it's a refiner's fire, not a torture chamber. And then eventually Christ will reconcile the entire creation to him. So every single person who has ever lived will eventually be saved. And that's the only thing that made sense to us at this point, to hang on to Christianity for like another 2 months. So it was like the hell doctrine, the division, all the different theologies. None of it was making sense anymore. We just took the path of universal reconciliation. That lasted about 2 months until my husband ended up working out of state. For a little while, he went down to Massachusetts to do a big kitchen remodel or bathroom remodel. And I was here by myself and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to question the faith. I'm going to question the entire thing. I want to see people who were hardcore Christians like I am, and I want to hear their deconstruction story. And that's where I found you. And that's where I found Brandon from Mindshift. And that's where I found another girl. I cannot remember her name right now, but if you just YouTubed her, you'd find her right away. She's very vocal about her deconstruction story.
Christy Burke?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. Yep. And I just sat in my bedroom and I listened to your guys' story. I listened to interviews you've done. I listened to Brandon's videos. I watched his videos. Like, that's all I did. And I just knew it in my gut that there's no way any of this is true. There's no way. After watching people be the way they were in my church, all the hypocrisy, all the judgment, all the legalism and rules, the experience out in Oregon, the hell doctrine, like working through that with my husband, and just how if you say something is the truth, there's no way there can be 5,000 different versions of the truth. So I got real with myself. I started questioning the authority of the Bible, because if you just pick up a King James version of the Bible, you'll see hell all over the place. But then when I got into universal reconciliation, I realized that there are so many mistranslations, that the way that the Greek was translated was terrible. So I got a Young's literal version of the Bible, and I saw that it was a completely different story when you take the Young's literal and put it next to the King James. So I allowed myself to question whether this is even really God's word. And then I remember Brandon saying something on his channel as far as, how many correct versions of the Bible are you going to need? How many correct dictionaries of the Greek and the Hebrew and the Aramaic are you going to need before you realize that it's arrogant to say you have the right translation, you have the right version? And I realized how arrogant I was being by saying, no, I've got it figured out. It's definitely pre-trib. It's definitely universal salvation. All these people who have been in the faith for 40, 50, 30 years, they've had it all wrong all along. I know better. I just realized that that was so wrong, and that there's no way that any of this could be as true as I thought it was. And that was the beginning of the end.
Wow. That's amazing. And I'm so glad that my channel and the others you mentioned were a part of that
Yeah.
process, because that's obviously the goal, is to help people in shoes like what you were going through.
Yes.
What was it like when you first told your husband that you were thinking maybe this wasn't real? Did he object at first, or was he like, no, I'm thinking the same thing, or what?
He had been thinking it, and I think he was nervous to talk to me about it because I was so radical and I was so, this is it, Jesus is it. And he had really begun to question how God's sovereignty, God's foreknowledge, and an all powerful God can work together and people can still end up damned and tortured. He was like, this makes absolutely no sense. And then he really struggled with the whole free will thing. He said, if God has foreknowledge and he already knows everything you're going to do in life, and he can see it before he even creates you, and he creates you anyways, and he knows you're never going to be saved, or that God's even ever going to choose you to be saved, because that's really more biblical than Arminianism, then we have an evil God. We have an issue. And so he had already been there, but universal reconciliation, that whole theology and doctrine, that answered all those questions for him. I was the one who went to him and I was like, maybe this is all just untrue and fairy tales, and maybe we just got sucked into something and got way over our heads and we got it wrong yet again. And so I started sending him stuff. I started sending him Brandon's videos and your videos and Christy Burke's videos. And I remember even texting him one of the first times I sent him one. I said, I'm really sorry to do this to you, because I know we just finally found peace with universal reconciliation, but just take a look at what these people are saying. And then we just got super into like the mythology of everything. I'm reading that book, God and Anatomy. I bought a ton of mythology books. I mean, that God and Anatomy is blowing my mind. That book is it's so many things that I saw in the Bible that I was like, what does this mean? She perfectly, it's so beautiful the way she does it. Make total sense now. And just the whole Yahweh character, how literal he was, his physical body, everything. It was, my deconversion happened pretty quickly, because I think it happened pretty quickly because of how radical I got and how invested I got in the faith. And I saw all the flaws so quickly. I saw all the division. I saw that people are just people. There's no evidence of the Holy Spirit. There's no evidence that anyone's made new in Christ. I still struggled with what we would call a besetting sin. You could call it a character flaw now, but I still struggled with things, and I would beg God, beg him in my prayer closet, fast for as long as I could without feeling I was going to pass out, to have him take this one thing from me. And he never did. And I would always say to myself, well, I'm supposed to be a new creature in Christ, but I still have so many of the same habits. I'm not new. Then the apologetic for that is, well, you're still a sinner. You're not perfect. That's why you need God. So it's so, secular. It just runs in a circle. There's always an answer for everything. It's too convenient. It's too good to be true. And just everything started coming to a boiling point and adding up. And I just got real with myself. And I said, there's no way any of this is true. There's no way.
When you finally got to that conclusion, let me ask first, how long ago was that?
That started in February of this year.
Okay, so this is pretty new for you.
This is very new.
We're doing this interview towards the end of May 2024. So just a few months ago, you fully deconverted.
Yeah.
Since it is so new, I do have to ask, and this is, I'm just playing devil's advocate, not trying to put you on the spot at all.
Sure.
But you did have a few shifts. What would you say to somebody who said you went through phases and this is another phase? Because there are people that do claim to be atheists, and then they either go back to something, or they at least go back to like some kind of spirituality or woo-woo, as we like to call it. They feel like there's got to be something bigger than just, nihilism and materialism. And I know you don't have to be landing on those things and be an atheist. You can be an atheist that still believes there's, some kind of energy to the universe, and perhaps,
Mhm.
leave it open to the questions of maybe there's something more. We don't know. But just in the pure sense of landing on atheism, what would you say to someone that says that was a few months ago that you were struggling, a few months before you were universalist, a few months before that, a few years before that, you were a fundamentalist Christian? What's to say that in a year you won't be a Buddhist? Like
Hmm.
where would you land with those kind of interrogations?
I actually had that interrogation, that exact same sentiment and statement from the wife of my pastor. She literally verbatim said, "This is just another phase you went through." And I had to defend myself to her. And I said, to me, it wasn't a phase. To me, it was as real as it gets. I believed with all of my heart. I couldn't have believed any harder. So when I was in it wasn't a phase. But what I see it as as I step back and as I look at my life and everything I've been involved with since 2011, it's been a pursuit to find truth and to find definitive answers about the reality that we live in and what's going on around us, and if there is anything after we die. And going through everything that I have, just being on that path of trying to figure out the truth, the only conclusion after going through everything that I can draw now is that there are no answers. So you may be able to find peace in the New Age movement. You may be able to find peace as a Christian. You may be able to find peace as a Buddhist, as an atheist, as agnostic. You may be able to label yourself whatever you want in the moment, but that does not mean that we all have it figured out, because I don't believe that anyone can have it figured out anymore. Also, that doesn't mean that just because there's different things that can give peace, like you can go through all these different phases and find peace, or find what you think is truth, that doesn't make one religion 100% true. So I guess you could say I've gone through phases, but maybe tomorrow I'll say, well, the Buddhists have some peace, but I think I've been through enough and I've tried enough out to say I'm done. I'm tired. And even if I got involved in Islam or Buddhist, I would still know after going through Christianity that they don't even have the answers, because there's still division there. There's no true definitive answers to be had about what's to come or what's going on in this world or why we're here or if it's created not. There's no 100%. It's just people's best guess. And that's where I'm at right now. So I had to defend myself from the line of I believed with all my heart. It wasn't just a phase to me, it was my reality. I loved Jesus with everything I had. And I just came out of it, and I came out of it saying, no, this isn't true, and no one really knows.
Yeah. Hmm. That's quite a journey. You've been on quite a journey. I mean,
Yeah.
that's when you step back from all the little stages and steps and details, it's like, what a journey already. And at this point, hopefully a lot of good things to come, both just in general in life, but also because of the choices you've made to escape mythology. And hopefully, what a beautiful gift you can give to the next generation for your daughter, that
Yeah,
you don't have to have her have all those shackles on. But you've been through a
absolutely.
lot. I guess a question related to that sentiment would be, like, how is the healing going at this point? Because you're kind of at the beginning of it. For many people, the healing is a multi-year process and more. And I mean, even though for me, like, I've been through a lot, and I do a lot of healing just by virtue of talking through it with people, like I do, hearing people's stories, many of them similar, some of them very different. But it's healing to me to kind of, it's cathartic at least to hear people's stories and to kind of bounce ideas back and forth. But I'm removed from this like 4.5 years.
Hmm.
It'll be 5 years in October. But there are days it still is like it hurts, and
Yeah.
there's things going on in my personal life that certainly are related to it, that causing immense pain. But it's like all those things add up to, like, wow, I've got a lot to unravel, but also just I've got a lot to heal from, so many hurts.
Hmm.
Where are you with that process, and where do you think like some of the biggest benefits are from, like, what do you do to, and maybe bring your husband into the topic too, but like, what do you all do to help yourselves heal and get more grounded and kind of reclaim your power, reclaim your identity? How's that working?
So at first, when I began deconstructing and I started to realize that none of this was true and that there was no God that was angry with me because I didn't evangelize today or was listening to all my thoughts or saw me in my private moments, I felt an immense amount of freedom. So that initial freedom was wonderful. I was like, wow, I really do have private time and I actually am free within myself. That felt so good. And it also felt good to be tired of searching for the answers, because now you can just kind of step back and go, I've gone there, I've searched, I've looked, I've been through all these things. I've done my time. I'm done. I'm done. I just want to live life the best that I can and enjoy it. That was very freeing and that was very exciting. What has been a struggle for me personally and pretty deeply is kind of being upset with myself about how I could get involved with this, how I ended up in such a fundamental Christian environment, how I changed so much about myself, how I believed with all my heart, how I even believed that I was talking to Jesus on a regular basis, and how I believed that I could feel the Holy Spirit, I could feel Christ's presence when I was praying for long periods of time. I'm I have a lot to unpack about how that happened, especially because I wasn't raised in it. It just like I got into it. I got into it in my late 20s. I also it I'm struggling. I struggle a lot because of how much I went into the world of conspiracy theories and end times, doomsday, apocalyptic thinking for so long, trying to get rid of that and trying to stop thinking that way, stop looking at the world through that lens, stop looking at certain groups in lenses that I used to before, because I think what ends up happening is the further you go into conservative Christianity, further you get into conservative politics and their ways of living and what's ideal for an American lifestyle or what's ideal for a man and a woman, marriage, all this stuff. And I have to really deprogram from all of that. And I have to say, it's okay. The way people want to live their lives, it's okay. And that's difficult for me personally. It's been difficult to lose friends that I considered family. It's been difficult knowing I have a black stain on my name in those circles. I know that they've started private chats, what they'll call prayer chats. They're not, they're gossip chats about me and my husband. But one way that I deal with this, and one way my husband and I deal with this, is we make a lot of jokes. We joke about it all the time, and we'll just say funny things to each other. We'll just laugh about how we got involved in what we consider the independent fundamental Baptist realm to be very cult-like. We consider Christianity in and of itself to be a blood magic cult. And that's where we're at. I mean, that's the reality of the situation. I mean, you have someone who died, you want to be washed in his blood, you would die for him, you put him before all things. The Jesus comes first, the religion comes first, everything else is secondary. You give your life. I mean, it has every tenet of a cult. And the deep irony, the weird thing, and this is I'm even struggling right now with myself, is when I was going out to Oregon, when I converted, I was listening to audiobooks about the Nexium cult with Keith Raniere. And in church, I asked the pastor to put up a slide every Sunday asking for prayer for people trapped in religious cults, because I was learning about the FLDS, the Fundamental Latter-day Saints, and all of these women's stories. I was researching. It was like my subconscious was like, research cults so that when you're ready to leave, you can see what you were in clearly. I was always listening to audiobooks about cults. And so as I was deconverting, I saw the same exact things when I was able to see clearly within hardcore fundamental Christianity. And that's been the heaviest part, is realizing what I got myself into, what I almost raised my daughter in, what I almost allowed myself to completely be enveloped by. That's been scary for me. Scary that you can so easily become a part of that, even if you weren't raised in it. Scary that how naive I was with certain information and ways that people present information and just thinking it to be true. And so that's why I'm kind of at this point where I just want to throw my hands in the air and say, I don't know, I'll never know, and I just don't care anymore. It's not important to me anymore.
Mhm. Wow. Again, what a journey. You've been through so much, and I definitely
Yeah.
agree with you. People will put you in a category of you're an apostate, you're a heretic.
Yes.
They'll mark you as a bad person, and certainly as unreliable if you've been in the faith. It's almost like when you're not in it, but we could maybe pull you in, you're salvageable. But if you've been in, fully in, and then you leave, it's like you're just in a different category. It's very interesting, but almost like unsalvageable at that point. You were salvageable when you were out before you got in, but now that you were in and out, you're not salvageable anymore. I know there's stories, people who do leave and come back, but by and large, most people do leave and stay out, and it's so heartbreaking. But the thing that I think is so interesting about this, and this is bringing it a little bit to more to my mentality and my personality, what got me out is just they're so ignorant of the mythology behind it all.
Mm.
And I know that there's a lot of people who would say, no, well, we've gone to the eight apologists YouTube channels, and we know, you all claim that Jesus is related to the Dionysius stories and the Hermes
Yeah.
stories and this and that, is related to all these, sun gods and so forth. And we've debunked all that. That's been so debunked so many times. It's just garbage. It's a garbage thought.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to dig a lot deeper than just the apologist YouTube channels to get the full information, because they're going to, again, give you just the glossy version that they want.
Yeah.
But when you do dive into stuff like the book you mentioned, God and Anatomy, and I'll do a quick plug for the Myth Vision channel, the Myth Vision YouTube
Yes.
channel. The link for that too, and all the other ones we mentioned. But Myth Vision does a great job of talking about the mythology behind Christianity and Judaism. When you really dive into it, it's like you don't have any imagination that it's that mythological. It
Yeah.
just feels like this must be right, because especially if you grew up in it, I know you didn't, but if you grew up in it, it really feels like just so historical. And
Mm-hmm.
then when you get the information that you need, it's eventually like your jaw drops,
Mm-hmm.
metaphorically, and just like, oh, wait a second, Jesus does look like he was based on other mythological characters. And he does look like he was based on Homer's Iliad and especially the Odyssey. And it does look like Paul is quoting from all these other books that are, you're like, wait a second, why does this is supposed to be inspired, but he's quoting from this philosopher and that philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean the section in Acts where he's doing it, obviously. I mean, like, where you don't even know about it. And then, of course, for a lot of Christians, learning that the book of Enoch is woven in so intensely to
Yeah.
the New Testament is like, wait a second, there's so much more here. And I think a lot of Christians, like, where they need to be for their safety for now, because they're probably afraid a little bit, like, if you're right, then the implications of what you are saying are going to basically say that I've been living a lie. I've been living in a mythology-based worldview, and I've basically wasted my life.
I
Like,
know.
that's terrorizing. If Anna is in any way correct, I'm wasting my life.
Mm-hmm.
And even the Bible, Paul says, if Christ isn't raised, I'm of all men to be most pitied. Like, wait a
Mm.
second, maybe I am. If that's true, maybe I am to be most pitied. And it's for a lot of people, it's just too terrorizing to go down that road. So they just kind of say, we've got the answers. I know smarter people have already looked at this. It's
Yeah.
case closed. It's not mythology.
Mm-hmm.
And what you have to have the bravery, to go to do what you did, to go back and say, well, what if it is? What if there's more to this story than the apologists are telling you? And as you know, for a lot of us, once you see it, you're like, oh, you can't unsee it. You
You
get that,
can't.
you get a primer, you start to see it, and you're like, oh, there's a man carrying a water pitcher. We'll show you the way to the upper room. You start to see it. Oh, there's two donkeys. Oh, there's the water and the wine, and you start to put it together.
Mm-hmm.
The 153 fish in John 21 with Pythagoreanism. You're like, oh snap, there's so much more in these texts than I ever thought. And I've been
Mm-hmm.
expositing, or my pastor's been expositing the word of God to me for decades. And I realized for the first time, I thought I knew what these texts said. And I don't have the clue. I haven't even started understanding what these texts, where they're really from, how they've evolved, and what they're responding to culturally from that day. It's funny, we were always told, learn the context, learn the context, learn the
Yes.
context.
Yes.
And yet you realize you never had the real context
Right.
historically and culturally. But
Yeah, it's like, no, don't learn that context.
yeah. Yeah,
They're the
only
one I
the
want, but don't go all the way.
yeah, this specific context. Well, in
Yeah.
terms of just maybe bringing us to a wrap up, could you just give a quick word for anyone that's at the hardest part of this, where they're at the beginning, maybe they're at that stage where you were near universal salvation, but they're just saying there's something wrong with this. This doesn't add up, either because they've studied some mythology, comparative mythology, they've just thought through hell, they've maybe had somebody that had a horrible situation, and like, why didn't God show up and help them?
Mhm.
Whatever it was that triggered it, they're at that spot where they're saying something doesn't make sense, and I feel uncomfortable going back to just my basic simple faith.
Yeah.
And I don't know where I'm going to land, but I do know that if I ask too many questions, just like you've talked about and testified to, if I ask too many questions, people are going to be upset and maybe even write me off. What would you say to somebody in that darkest part of it?
I would tell them that it's yes, it's valid to be afraid of people being upset with you when you eventually, if you make that choice to walk away from the faith, because it's not true. It is very valid to be scared and to be worried. And you should expect that there will be pushback, because that's what my husband and I received. We received a lot of pushback. Our pastor and his wife were very angry and treated us very, very poorly. We've had people write us off as if we've never existed. But the people who were your true friends will not leave you. They will be your friends, not because of what you believe in, not because you still believe the same. It's because they genuinely love you. And I can attest to that. I still have 3 people that are still my friends to this day that I can talk very openly about what happened. They listen to me and they still love me. That's true friendship. Anyone else that's going to get mad at you, anyone else that's going to shame you, anyone else that's going to call you names, it's going to gaslight you and you never were a true Christian, because no Christian would really walk away. They're not your friends. They're not out for your best interest. They don't really love you. It's okay to lose those people. And I would also say, you will find freedom in the mystery of life. You will find freedom in not knowing. There's actually more freedom on this side of not knowing than there is in pretending that you have all the answers and spending your life trying to defend them. You can say to yourself, I don't know, and I just want to live my life. And I think that if you were to take that step and you were to really push it all the way and you were to walk away from something that you once believed was true, you will be liberated, and you will be so much more happy getting out of something that's not real, that's not true, and that's only putting a tremendous amount of baggage and boulders on your shoulder to carry around every day.
Couldn't have said it better. That was amazing. I couldn't have said it better. What a beautiful, beautiful way to put it. And yeah, it's so true. And so many people do, that come on this channel and others like it, they do testify to that on the other side of deconversion, the peace was exponentially greater.
It is. It
Um,
truly, I mean, I had peace when I gave my life to Jesus, but not really. Not really. I had more baggage and expectation and guilt being a Christian. And now it's a totally different ballpark. I mean, you really do realize that you are free. And yeah, there are things in life that restrict you. You need to have money, there are taxes, whatever. Those are restrictions, but in your mind, in your heart, and in yourself, you're truly free. And that's, I think, if there's anything I've learned in life, that's what I've learned. And I'm just going to end there. I don't want to keep going any further. I just want to live.
yeah. Hmm. Well said. Well said. Well, I just want to wrap up by saying we've been so honored to hear your story, and so glad, of course, that you escaped. That's the biggest picture, as always. So glad you escaped, and so glad that at this point your daughter is going to have a much better chance
Yes.
at living a free life
Yes.
than we did. But you had to make a lot of difficult choices to get to where you are, and you had to be willing to be very brave. And for so many of us, that's like a pivot point, is being willing to take that bravery and say, I know that there's going to be, like, for example, I might be tempted to think this is the devil tempting me, or this is my pride. I just don't want to bow my knee to God. It's
Yeah.
like to say, no, I'm being honest with myself. I know the
Mm-hmm.
devil's not involved in these thoughts, and I'm not trying to usurp God's throne. I just honestly want the truth. And I
Yes.
just I just honestly want to deal with the fact that these questions they're nagging at me like splinters in
Mm-hmm.
my mind, I do not have good answers for them. And if
Mm-hmm.
God is not the author of confusion, and
Right.
he is the truth, and the truth will set you free, then this isn't adding up.
That's right. That's
And
exactly right.
Yeah, it gets to a point where you have to look for some other way to see this. And for so many of us, we realize that it was just a bunch of arguably very bad men from a long time ago trying to make the best that they could of their worldview and control people with power, but also just some of them were probably very curious about life, trying to figure out what their mysteries were as far as they understood them. And
Yeah.
to them, this was for some of them at least, this was the best that they could come up with, and that's okay for that was their era. But it's
Yeah.
like we don't have to live our lives based on the worldview of dead men from 2 to 4,000 years ago. Like we just don't. They're long dead. And I think some of them could see how the universe has grown and what we've learned. I think some of them be like, oh, if you were listening to me when I wrote that, please, I was number one. I might have been high as a kite, but which I think some of them were. But
Yeah.
but otherwise, I think if some of them could have seen how this world evolved, they'd be like, you know what, please do not go based on my books. And even
Yeah.
Jesus, I think a lot of people have made a good argument that if Jesus could see what Christianity's become, he would be like, no, 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 no. I did not claim to be God. I did not. That was added later. That was not what I originally said. I claimed
I came
to
from the
have,
lost house of Israel.
yeah, yeah,
So, I mean, yeah, there is a lot.
yeah. There's so many ways. And I think these people would say even the religion that's based on me is not what I said. And it's not what I meant. So please, please don't believe it. But I digress. Anyway,
Yeah.
was there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, just one more quick thing. I notice a lot of times, like especially when I was walking away and telling people in our church, and there was like the big meeting and everything going down. It was always, this is the devil. This is the work of Satan doing this to you. So if there is a Christian watching, or anyone watching that is thinking that this is the devil who's gotten a hold of my life and my heart, there's two things that I would just kind of want to say. That, like, one, the devil is not omnipresent. He's not everywhere all at once. So why did he pick me out of, there's way bigger fish out there? Why don't you get some of the big name pastors or something like that? There's no way he picked me. And so that part I just found that was like one of the reoccurring things that always came up, was that the devil's done this to you. And then the other thing is, God promises protection for his children. And there's so much about not losing your salvation. So I couldn't have believed any harder. I couldn't have loved the Lord anymore. I couldn't have wanted my life to please God. My question would be, why didn't God protect me? Why am I here today saying none of this is true? I don't believe in any of it. So that's just always kind of those two things I hear a lot. I've had a lot of conversations like that. And that's kind of just what I've concluded is, why didn't God protect me? And the devil is not omnipresent. He's not everywhere at once.
Yeah, that's a great point. I thought that too. It took me 43 years to escape. And I thought, that's 43 years, 4 decades in some, that he had to show up big and make
Yeah.
it crystal clear that he is real and very real, and that he's involved and that he's got a plan. Like, he never showed up.
Yeah.
It just fell apart more and more. And like other people have used those illustrations, it was like sand in your fingers. And eventually you're holding on to it and the sand just keeps on falling through, and there's just nothing there. And if God was real and God was big and powerful, he could have easily turned the course of your life and my life to bring us back to the faith, as we were drifting. And instead, we become more convinced than ever that he's not real, and we've had more peace than ever. So, go at this point too, you get to a point where it's like you can't unsee what you've seen.
That's
And
right.
your bullshit meter gets real sensitive. Your spidey senses, you're like, I'm sorry, if you're going to tell me that God likes to cut off into little boys' penises,
Ah,
and he wants you to eat symbolically eat somebody's dead body and drink their blood, and all this kind of stuff. I'm sorry. It's just, this is getting really weird really fast.
yes. Yes.
You can't get me anymore. I'm not savable. It's just, this is too weird. So anyway.
Yes. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah. And I think that if God was as big as Christians claim, and he was all loving like Christians claim, he would want everyone to be saved. I mean, he says, my will is that everyone be saved, but only a few of you will. Doesn't make any sense. A loving God probably wouldn't have created it to be like this in the first place, but would want, if this is the way he set it up and Jesus had to die, that was his plan, he would bring everyone to salvation. That's the only way you can reconcile a loving and all-knowing God and still have him be that way. There's no way anyone could end up in the lake of fire. So yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. And if the whole Christian narrative were true, you'd have to really conclude he's a psychopath and a narcissist.
Yes, absolutely.
So, well, great stuff. Thank you so much again for sharing your story. I'll just wrap up by saying we've been speaking with Anna McBride. Please go check out her awesome artwork. It was really cool. I'm so impressed. But please check out her cool paintings. And Anna, thank you so much for your time. So good to get to know you. And thanks for sharing your story today.
Thank you so much, Tim. I really appreciate you having me on. This has been really helpful for me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Likewise. Thanks again. Have a great day.